Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore how that little device sitting in your pocket fundamentally shifted the entire software industry. We're unpacking the absolutely fascinating journey of Apple's mobile platform, starting from a surprisingly limited first release, all the way to the massive, tightly controlled ecosystem that literally dominates the tech landscape today. So, I want you to imagine your smartphone today, but without a single downloadable application. No ride sharing to get home, no mobile banking, no endless scrolling through social media feeds. I mean, it sounds basically impossible now, right? But back in 2007, when the very first iPhone launched, that was the actual reality. There was absolutely no app store. Now, what's really interesting here is that Apple's founder, Steve Jobs, originally resisted third-party software entirely. Jobs was famous for his intense focus on simplicity and control, and he genuinely believed that allowing outside developers to make apps would just compromise the phone's performance and security. His big solution? He insisted developers just create web apps that would run natively through the Safari browser. To see how we got from there to here, we're going to cover the birth of iOS, the App Store revolution, evolving the operating system, the integration strategy, and finally, challenges to the empire. Starting off with Section 1, the birth of iOS. You see, modern iOS didn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually built on the legacy of Next Step, which is an operating system dating way back to 1989. When Apple acquired Next, they used it to build macOS X, and that in turn became the foundation for iPhone OS 1. Because of this shared DNA, the iPhone inherited some absolutely crucial stability features, like protected memory. Basically, this meant that if one app crashed, it wasn't going to take down your whole phone with it. But even with those advanced underpinnings, that first release was incredibly basic by today's standards. I mean, it is wild to look back and remember that we survived without cut, copy, and paste. And since there was no app store, an entire underground jailbreak community sprang up just so users could install some rudimentary third-party programs. Oh, and fun fact, if you owned an iPod Touch back then, you actually had to pay a $20 upgrade fee in iTunes just to get a software update. Crazy, right? Which brings us to Section 2, the App Store revolution. Apple quickly realized web apps just weren't cutting it, leading to a massive pivot the very next year. Capitulating on third-party apps created an absolute behemoth. By opening up the iPhone to developers, Apple inadvertently sparked a massive new economy. To put the sheer scale of this into perspective, the App Store generated a staggering $10 billion in revenue for Apple in the year 2024 alone. The real genius of the App Store, though, was its streamlined structure. First, developers build their apps using Apple's official software development kit, or SDK. Then, Apple acts as the ultimate gatekeeper, meticulously reviewing every single app submission for quality and security. And finally, users get the seamless one-tap download experience. By acting as a secure, centralized installer, the App Store completely democratized software distribution. It effectively ended the era of blindly hunting for safe download links on the internet and just crossing your fingers that you didn't accidentally install malware. Moving on to Section 3, evolving the operating system. Because to handle this new gold rush of software, the OS itself had to mature at a breakneck pace. Over the years, the operating system evolved incredibly fast. In 2010, iOS 4 finally brought us multitasking. Then iOS 5 was a massive leap forward, introducing iMessage and iCloud, which effectively cut the cord, meaning you didn't have to plug your phone into a PC just to set it up anymore. By 2017, iOS 11 aggressively pushed the whole industry forward by dropping support for older 32-bit apps entirely. And by 2019, the ecosystem had grown so incredibly complex that Apple actually split the codebase, creating iPadOS specifically for their tablets. Now for Section 4, the integration strategy. The real genius wasn't just the phone OS itself, it was how it fit into Apple's overarching business strategy. As CEO Tim Cook has stated, Apple believes in designing the whole widget. They rely on three main pillars of integration. It starts with the hardware, which is increasingly powered by their custom-designed Apple silicon. Then there's the software, where they maintain absolute exclusive control over the operating system. And finally, you have the services layer, stuff like Apple Music and iCloud, sitting right on top. It creates a seamless flow from the physical chips inside the device all the way up to your monthly subscriptions. And this architectural control is incredibly comprehensive. Every single hardware product they make runs on a proprietary in-house operating system. From iOS on the iPhone to macOS on the Mac, all the way to visionOS on the Vision Pro. This ensures Apple retains exclusive end-to-end control over the user experience across their entire product lineup. Now, for sure, this tight integration creates immense convenience. Features like Handoff, where you can copy text on your iPhone and magically paste it onto your Mac, feel pretty incredible. But it also results in what industry analysts call ecosystem lock-in. A prime example of this is iMessage. By keeping it totally exclusive to Apple devices, it creates genuine social pressure to stay within the Apple family, especially among younger users who definitely dread having those infamous green text bubbles. When we compare this to the rest of the industry, the strategic divergence is pretty stark. Google, for instance, takes an open approach, licensing their Android OS to dozens of different hardware manufacturers like Samsung and Xiaomi. Contrasted with that, Apple's strictly closed proprietary walled garden becomes incredibly apparent. They just do not license their software to anyone, period. And looking at the data brilliantly illustrates why this closed strategy matters so much financially. Despite only selling about 15% of the world's smartphone units, Apple captures a staggering 75% of the entire industry's profits. By completely controlling the premium experience, they're able to command the premium margins. Furthermore, this strategy has evolved way beyond just selling you a piece of hardware. Their massive growth in services revenue, jumping from roughly $16 billion in 2013 to over $78 billion in 2022, proves they've successfully transitioned to monetizing the ecosystem itself. They're expertly leveraging that massive installed user base to sell recurring subscriptions. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Challenges to the Empire. Because keeping the gates to this highly profitable garden securely locked has generated some significant friction in recent years. Apple heavily champions privacy as a core feature, famously stating they don't monetize your personal data. So in 2021, they introduced App Tracking Transparency, which requires apps to explicitly ask for your permission before tracking your activity. Now, while this is a huge win for consumer privacy, these strict rules have severely impacted the digital advertising models of competitors like Meta. It really showcases how Apple's control over the OS can essentially dictate the fortunes of other massive tech giants. Unsurprisingly, Apple is currently facing intense global scrutiny over all of this. Developers have long criticized the 30% commission Apple takes on app sales. This has led to high-profile lawsuits, most notably from Epic Games, who are fighting for alternative payment methods. Simultaneously, the European Union's Digital Markets Act is actually forcing Apple to allow alternative app stores in Europe, and the U.S. Department of Justice filed a major antitrust complaint in 2024. Governments and developers worldwide are increasingly arguing that this closed loop stifles competition. Beyond just the software, the company is also navigating right-to-repair criticisms. Organizations like iFixit have pointed out that proprietary screws and software-locked parts make Apple devices notoriously difficult for independent shops to fix. In response to this mounting pressure, Apple did recently introduce a limited self-service repair program, which allows consumers to purchase genuine parts and tools directly. From a time before copy and paste even existed to a trillion-dollar ecosystem that defines modern computing, the journey of Apple's software is undeniably fascinating. But I'll leave you with this final thought to consider. As global regulations continue to mount and developers push back harder than ever, will the high walls of Apple's garden stand firm, or are they destined to fall? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the technology you use every day.